Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar to discuss the Federal Transit Administration's recently published request for information on transit worker safety. My name is Gail Lissy. I'm the Acting Associate Administrator for FTA's Office of Transit Safety and Oversight, and I've been with FTA for about 25 years and previously as FTA's Regional Administrator in Region 6 out of Fort Worth, Texas. So safety is the U.S. Department of Transportation and FTA's #1 priority, and FTA strives to advance safe, reliable, and equitable transit service throughout the United States. One very important factor of that responsibility is the identification of hazards, risks, and concerns that threaten the safety of the nation's transit systems, its workers, and its users. FTA uses its safety risk management process to identify, assess, and mitigate these risks and hazards to work towards reducing injuries and fatalities in the industry. Today, we will share details about the Request for Information, or RFI, for an important concern that FTA is currently evaluating through the safety risk management process, and that concern is transit worker safety. So this includes roadway worker protection programs, as well as transit worker assault prevention. So I encourage you to be a part of the process by sharing your input on transit worker safety, specifically information and data related to roadway worker protection and transit worker assault prevention. And the comment period for this request for information closes on November 23rd, so please make sure you get your comments in by that date. We value your unique perspectives and insights, and I would like to thank you for your engagement and partnership in this important undertaking. Now I will turn the presentation over to Ray Biggs, our FTA's Acting Director of System Safety, who will provide more information on the RFI and how to share your feedback. Thank you very much. Ray, over to you.
Thank you, Gail. FTA administers a public transportation safety program, the safety program, to improve the safety performance of the nation's transit systems. FTA adopted the principles and methods of safety management systems, otherwise known as SMS, as the foundation of the safety program. These principles and methods enable FTA to proactively identify and address safety risks at the industry level. With this RFI, FTA is looking for input from the public regarding transit worker safety mitigations, including potential minimum safety standards for RWP programs and transit worker assault prevention. We ask that the public provide information and data that FTA can take into consideration during SMS analysis. Please note this RFI will serve as a planning document. The RFI should not be construed as policy, a request for proposal or RFP, or an obligation on the part of the government. Next slide. Next slide. So today we will review the background of this RFI before providing an overview of the questions it poses to the public. We will then highlight submission details such as key dates, how to submit comments, and a point of contact for respondents. I will now turn it over to Frank Hackett, our SRM coordinator, to continue this webinar for this RFI. Frank.
Thank you, Ray, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Hackett, and I am a program manager and the Safety Risk Management Coordinator within the Office of Transit Safety and Oversight. As Ray mentioned, I'll be introducing the details of the request for information on transit worker safety, which, as Gail stated, includes roadway worker protection and transit worker assault prevention. Next slide, please. As background, in August of 2016, FTA published the National Safety Program Regulation. This regulation establishes practical and procedural rules for FTA's administration of the program to carry out the Public Transportation Safety Program mandate to improve the safety of transit systems. In July of 2018, FTA published the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Regulation, which requires certain transit agencies to adopt SMS principles and methods. Also, it requires the development, certification, implementation, and maintenance of the agency's safety plans, or ASPs. Through the implementation of ASPs and the SMS process, transit agencies proactively identify safety hazards and mitigate safety risks within their system. In 2019, FTA implemented its internal safety risk management, or SRM, process to proactively identify and address safety concerns within the transit industry. FTA assesses safety topics identified in FTA's SRM action plan through its SRM process. FTA began reviewing RWP through the SRM process in 2019. FTA's safety assessment team identified 7 potential consequences from rail transit agencies and their employees working on or occupying the rail transit roadway, and developed mitigation options for FTA's Executive Safety Review Board. In 2021, FTA expanded the safety topic to transit worker safety in order to address transit worker assault prevention through the same SRM process as RWP. With this RFI, FTA seeks to gather information and discover valid and reliable aggregate data from the public about the use of RWP redundant protections and transit worker assault prevention that the industry believes FTA should consider as it proceeds with the SRM process to address this topic at the federal level. FTA believes that the transit industry's input is important to understanding risks to transit workers and potential mitigations. FTA will use the input received and evaluated potential actions to mitigate safety risks for transit workers. This RFI is open to the transit industry personnel, researchers, contractors, government entities, transit users, and other interested parties. Next slide, please. Before taking you through the questions to the public, we will provide some background information and context on RWP and transit worker assault prevention. An RWP program is a rail transit agency, or RTA's, approach to ensuring worker safety during tasks conducted on or about the transit roadway, such as track inspections. These programs are designed to protect workers from the movement of trains as well as other hazards on the roadway, like the electrified third rail. Some programs include redundant protections, or protections beyond the worker's ability to detect a train. FTA categorizes redundant protections in 2 main groups: physical and procedural. Physical redundant protections are technological or mechanical interventions that physically stop the train from striking a roadway worker, such as a derailleur or shunt in the signal system. Procedural redundant protections are rule-based interventions that rely on the worker training and compliance, such as the use of foul time to clear the track for workers. The National Transportation Safety Board and the Transit Advisory Committee for Safety recommended that FTA take action to address safety concerns with RWP. The NTSB included improving rail worker safety in its 2021 to 2022 Most Wanted list, which identified FTA's lack of RWP regulations, as well as concerns about the lack of redundant protections and deficiencies in agency RWP training programs. TRAX developed 8 RWP recommendations in its final report submitted in September of 2020. These included minimum safety rules and requirements, as well as research into best practices for RWP. Next slide, please. TRAX also recommended actions to address transit worker assault. FTA continues to explore options for potential FTA actions to address this concern. From 2010 to 2020, FTA has noted an average annual increase of 17% in the rate of all security events reported to the National Transit Database per passenger boarding. There also has been an increase in the rate of assaults on transit operators, defined by the NTD as the personnel, other than security agents, scheduled to be aboard vehicles in revenue operations, including vehicle operators, conductors, and ticket collectors. The NTD also defines an assault as an unlawful attack by one person on another. Based on a review of the NTD data, FTA also notes that other transit workers, such as station managers who do not meet the NTD definition of an operator but are also public-facing, also experience assaults in transit systems. For the purposes of this RFI, in discussing transit worker assault, FTA will use definitions established in the NTD. Next slide, please. The following list of topic areas and questions are intended to guide respondents in responding to the RFI. Respondents may respond to any questions and do not need to answer all of the questions. The first topic area is roadway worker protection. FTA's questions to the public are: number 1, how often do RTA workers work on or about the roadway while passenger train or other equipment moves are made? Question number 2, which RTAs currently have an RWP program? How are these programs implemented? What types of training and certifications are required? And what costs are associated with various programs? Next slide, please. Question number 3 is: what types of redundant protections, physical or procedural as characterized by FTA, do RTAs use? How do RTAs implement the requirements for redundant protections, or what steps do RTAs take to determine what kinds of redundancies to implement? Should only physical redundant protections, such as shunts or derailleurs, be required when train or equipment moves are permitted? Should procedural protections, such as foul time, be permitted in lieu of physical redundant protections? Next slide, please. Question number 4, how should RWP effectiveness be reviewed and measured by an RTA or other safety stakeholder? How does an RTA review and measure RWP effectiveness? Question number 5, what approaches to RWP have been most effective and least effective? Question number 6, if FTA pursues requirements for RWP programs, what minimum requirements should be included? Should the same requirements apply to each rail transit mode as defined by the NTD? Next slide, please. Question number 7. What other types of FTA actions might be beneficial to support roadway worker safety? Question number 8. What information do RTAs collect on RWP that is not reportable to the NTD? What internal thresholds do RTAs use for tracking roadway worker safety events other than those reportable to the NTD? On average, how many additional roadway worker safety events occur per year that do not meet the current NTD reporting requirement? What are or would be the costs associated with collecting and tracking these additional safety events? Question number 9, what technology is available to increase roadway worker safety? How can FTA better support the development and implementation of these technologies? Next slide, please. The second topic area is transit worker assault prevention. FTA's questions to the public are: number 10, what types of interactions typically lead to transit worker assaults, including operator assaults? What actions could address and limit these types of interactions? What approaches could prevent transit worker assaults? What differences, if any, are there in approaches to preventing transit worker assaults across different types of transit systems or modes? Next slide, please. Question number 11. If FTA pursues requirements to address transit worker assaults, what minimum requirements should be included? How should the requirements apply to different transit system types or modes? Question number 12, what other types of FTA actions might be beneficial to support transit worker assault prevention? Question number 13, what information is collected on transit worker assaults that is not reportable to the NTD? What internal thresholds do RTAs use for tracking transit worker assaults other than those reportable to the NTD? On average, how many additional transit worker assaults occur per year that do not meet the current NTD reporting requirement? How many of these additional transit worker assaults are operator assaults? And what are or would be the costs associated with tracking these additional assaults? Next slide, please. How can FTA better support development and implementation of these technologies? Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of important dates and submission details. FTA requests comments by November 23rd, 2021. You may file comment identified by docket number FTA-2021-0012 by any of the following methods. Through the federal e-rulemaking portal, go to https://www.regulations.gov and follow the online instructions for submitting comments. By mail or hand delivery, and the address on the screen is where you can either mail or hand deliver your comments. The third option will be by fax. The fax number would be 202-493-2251. Please note, if you are submitting comments electronically as a PDF or an Adobe file, these documents must be scanned using an optical character recognition process, thus allowing the agency to search and copy certain portions of submissions. For comments delivered by hand or courier, we remind you that the U.S. Department of Transportation building is open between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, except on federal holidays. Next slide, please. All comments received into the docket will be made public in their entirety, excluding exceptions outlined in the Federal Register's notice. The comments will be searchable by name of the individual submitting the comment or signing the comment if submitted on behalf of an association, business, labor union, etc. You should not include information in your comments that you do not want made public. You may review the U.S. Department of Transportation's Complete Privacy Act statement in the Federal Register published on April 11th, 2000 in 65 CFR 19477-78 or at transportation.gov/privacy. Next slide, please. Thank you for joining today's webinar. For further information on this RFI, please contact Ray Biggs at ray.biggs@dot.gov. As a reminder, we will provide the link to these slides and post the recording of the webinar as soon as possible. You can access the RFI via the link on this slide. Thank you one more time for attending today, and that will conclude today's session.